everyone. Thanks for being here to our China Investment and Interest Group, founded by several people who are here today, of course, with our chairman, Harry Edelson, right here. Thank you, Harry. We have quite a few people here today, and we have some people joining us virtually as well. So this is our first bi-coastal meeting. We have people in California and we have people in New York, and actually later on we have a speaker from Beijing. So that's kind of our first two, that we're going to have a virtual speaker from Beijing. But I also would like to thank Reed Smith for hosting us in this wonderful space and providing a nice reception for all of us. And I'd like to welcome Jerry DiFiore to the podium here to say a few words.
Thank you, Rebecca. So it's great to see a lot of friendly faces that I've seen a long time before, and to welcome everyone back to another one of these events that we're hosting. Reed Smith has been involved with the China Investment Group for a long time now, and we're happy to continue to be involved. I want to wish everyone a happy first day of spring, and hope that you guys have an enjoyable event. And if you have ever have any questions about Reed Smith or need my help, you know where to find me. So Rebecca, back to you.
Okay, next I'd like to welcome Harry Edelson to come up and tell a few jokes, and also tell us about the membership option, which is available today. And Harry, why don't you come on up and say a few words about the history of this group and what membership options we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks, Rebecca. Rebecca is our latest member of our group, and she is going to help out quite a bit. And she will be very active in getting members and in getting speakers and getting venues. So we've been doing that for 22 years. And we're having a great time doing it. And our members are terrific. And it's more like having a little party amongst ourselves. So in fact, I'll tell you a story about New York City, since some of you are from out of town. So one day there was an accident on Broadway and Eucharistic is the name of the cross street, Eucharistic and Broadway. So somebody got hit and died right there on the street at Broadway. So the patrolman called up headquarters and said, "We have a bad accident. Somebody was hit by a car and is dead. It's on the corner of Eucharist and Broadway." And the fellow at the other end said, "How do you spell Eucharist?" And the patrolman said, "I don't know. Do you know?" He said, "No." He said, "That's okay. We'll just drag the body over 2 blocks to Pine Street, and that'll be it." And that's what happened. So we have some clever police people in the New York area. We've gone through a lot in 22 years. And our members are terrific people. So our group is more like a fireside chat. Nobody pulls rank. They all like each other. They help each other. And like, for example, I'm trying to meet the new head of the Treasury, Besant. I'd like to meet him. If anybody knows how to get to him, let me know. I've tried all day, cannot get through to him. So usually someone in the group can help out. So what we want to do is add new members, and our membership is $1,500 one time. That's it. And you get to go to parties like we're having today. And we have a party generally every year. A lot of times it's in Manhattan. And we help each other out. So our members are very close to each other. And if you ever need help in some area, we just call one of our members who can help us out. And now Rebecca is going to help us out with the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Harry. And that was a good joke, but not as good as your joke in February. Okay. So I would like to say that we do have several meetings coming up. Our next one is April 16th, where we're going to have Ronald Schramm speak about China in Africa. And this is going to be a very unusual venue, the Breitling Boutique at Madison and 57th. So that's not to be missed. And if you don't know about Breitling, it's a famous Swiss watch company. And they're going to give us a little, I don't know, maybe somebody will get a free watch. Let's see. May 15th, we have the author of a new book called Apple in China. He's a Financial Times journalist, and CLSA is hosting us. So we really appreciate the venues, the hosting, the speakers, and our core members. Let me just quickly introduce our core members. David Dempsey at the head table here is a core member. John Allen is a core member. Steve Schuster is a core member. William Brothers is a core member. Ming Zong is a core member. Who am I missing? Tell me, help me out. That's it, right? We're missing Michael Silver, but he is a core member. So anyhow, without further ado, well, this is the Breitling invitation for April 16th. As you can see, it's a wonderful venue. And then we have the Apple in China book. So without further ado, and to keep us on schedule, because we have a virtual speaker waiting for us later at 5 p.m. our time, 5 a.m. his time in Beijing. I'd like to welcome Frank Yu to the stage to talk about his latest startup and his ideas about why DeepSeek is having such an impact in AI. So Frank's going to tell us a little bit about that. And let me just welcome Frank to come up here.
So first of all, thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, China Investment Group, for inviting me to speak on this. It's quite an honor. So this is a little bit about my background. So I lived in Beijing for 13 years, but I lived in Hong Kong and Singapore as well, so add another 7 years. So actually, I came from a background in finance. I'm a fixed income trader for Coutts Private Bank, which was part of NatWest. And then I worked in Manhattan here, only a few blocks away, and also in Hong Kong. But my real passion has always been technology. So once I came back to Hong Kong in 2000, I worked at the first internet company in Asia called China.com. And then I was recruited by Microsoft to launch Xbox into Asia. And from there, I went to Microsoft Research Asia in Beijing. So I spent 13 years there. And I got to see a lot of the changes, not just in China, but in Asia in general, in technology. I had a startup in Beijing called Shoji Mobile. We were acquired by Tencent. And after I left, Tencent seems to be part of my life, because even after I left that startup, I still worked for Tencent indirectly, because I was contracted as an analyst for Coronation, which runs basically Naspers sovereign wealth fund in South Africa. And the reason why is because Tencent at that time was 45% owned by the South Africans. But I would also follow Alibaba, Qihoo 360, Shanda, NetEase, and I myself am from the gaming industry. So at that time, China Games. So this sort of background of what I'm going to speak about is because of my background, not just in the investment and sort of financial realms of China and Asia, but specifically in technology and all the changes there. And also, I'm from New Jersey. I went to Rutgers and I went to Harvard for my master's, but I've lived abroad for almost 17 years. So I came back to the United States in 2015. And I'm also a co-founder of a startup here. So if not, I'll just continue with my AI talk. And one thing I do realize is that I'm used to giving this talk to people who are technical. And some of these terms may be a little bit alien for some people. So if you don't understand it, feel free to ask, because I'm just immersed in this world. And to me, it's like I see this terminology all the time.
Microphones at your table. And if you don't have one directly in front of you, you can use the mic that's near you. And I need to turn this on. You can use the mic that's near you. Is that on now? Yeah, can you hear me? Yes, all right. So I want to say that we do have microphones around the room. So if you do have a question for Frank, you can ask it directly. And we'll try to keep this somewhat interactive, but we have a hard stop at 5 p.m. for this. So we need to keep rolling. Okay, go ahead, Frank.
And Rebecca, can you give me a 2-minute warning when my time?
2-minute warning, yes.
Okay, thank you. So, so everyone's been hearing about DeepSeek, and it was sort of a surprise announcement for the whole world in AI, but specifically for US. And you know, if you saw the drop in NVIDIA stock as well as the whole tech industry, it was a significant shock. And the reason why is that DeepSeek is an anomaly, not just in AI, but specifically even in Chinese technology. And what they did was they released a reasoning model. So a reasoning model is one of the more advanced models that OpenAI only just recently released. Cost them like $1 billion to train that model. DeepSeek seems to have done it supposedly at 6 million US, but I don't think so. I think it cost them more like 60 million, but that's still cheaper than what OpenAI is doing. But the fact that they released it with basically cheaper costs, but also they didn't have full advantage of all the technology that the US has, like, which is the latest H100s. So the more significant part about DeepSeek is not just that the company released this, but they wrote a paper on how to do it. Sorry about the typo, but how to duplicate it. So any startup, both in China and the US, and even OpenAI, can use techniques to make things cheaper. So it caused a fundamental shift in the way we build AI, but also how AI going forward will become cheaper at the applied side. And they open sourced it. So if you want the DeepSeek largest model at 670 billion parameters, you can actually put it on your laptop. It's only 500 gigabytes. You won't be able to run it because you need a lot of very big GPUs to do so. And they released the reasoning model DeepSeek R1. And you have to understand that OpenAI, this is comparable to OpenAI's latest model. Not only did they give it away for free, but it's open source. So if you want to build a business using this model, you can. And you could load it up locally as well. So that's a little bit of a big change for the AI companies here in the US. Now, DeepSeek, the company, is actually a hedge fund called High Flyer. And they were a quantitative trading company, a little like a Renaissance. And they were making a lot of money. They made so much money that they decided to spend some of their money and a lot of their GPUs to creating this model. And High Flyer is a little bit of an unusual, because it's not really a tech company the way Alibaba or Tencent are. They're a financial company that decided to go into basically technology, which, if you remember D.E. Shaw back in the day, D.E. Shaw is very similar. It was a hedge fund that not only created the first email system like Juno, but that's also where Jeff Bezos came from. He left D.E. Shaw and he formed Amazon. So it's not unusual for hedge funds to be able to create innovative technology startups. So they used their GPUs, which they got before the US export ban, from trading to basically train the model. They didn't have the latest, but they had a lot. And so there's a term that I guess best describes DeepSeek is shanzhai, which in Mandarin means mountain bandits. But informally, it also means DIY grassroots, sort of the underdog, sort of like it's basically the rebel who basically creates something with limited resources. And it's sort of a folk hero among the Chinese tech industry. For one, it was kind of unexpected by a lot of, even the big tech companies were surprised, like the Tencents, the Alibabas were surprised by this company. Also, it's pretty much grassroots. So let me tell you something about DeepSeek and why this is a fundamental shift of the way we look at technology companies in China. The founder, Liu Wenfeng, hired people who were under 30. He didn't go with the usual model of hiring a senior person and having the senior person bring all their staff into the company. He basically hired like bright guys and bright women from the latest universities. And he has a preference for people in humanities, not the people in technology. I mean, yes, there are PhDs and master students, but he also likes artists, poets as well. So that's a little unusual for a Chinese company. So as you see, DeepSeek was a shock to the Chinese tech companies who had this sort of system of how things should be done. So DeepSeek is also a believer of open source. A lot of the big tech companies in China would close source. They would release their information because they feel it's a competitive advantage. So that is the DeepSeek moment that hit the US. Now, this is recently, in the last week or so, there's called the Manus moment. So again, a Chinese company has made a surprise to the US AI industry. So Manus, which in Beijing is called Monica, and the founder is from Beijing and Wuhan, is Xiaohong. And even though it's called Monica in China, it's actually a Singapore listed company called Butterfly Effect Pte Limited. And so technically it's a Singapore company, but we really know it's a China company. And it was funded in 2023 by both Tencent and Sequoia China. Now, what's really interesting is also they have another model called Manus AI. So what Manus AI, it's not a foundation model, it's an autonomous agent. It's a totally digital worker, which we've had those in the United States, but they got it to work pretty well. And they're not using the latest model. They're using Sonnet 3.5, which is from Claude Anthropic. But all their tools are open source. So basically anyone can duplicate what they did if you know exactly what tool. So the real technologies, they were able to string it together. So it wasn't technology was innovative. It's the fact that they packaged it really well. And it uses something which is an agentic framework. So the big news in the last few years has been these big models like OpenAI's O1 or O3 or Claude's Sonnet, Haiku, or Gemini Pro 2. I mean, you're going to see more of these models. So for many of you, it's just maybe names, but each new model is sort of a leap in both technology. And
So Frank, does this mean that the Chinese are getting a leg up now in AI,
Okay,
generative AI?
okay, so that's my next slide.
The
But before I
next
do that,
slide, all
before
right.
that, let me talk about
Yes, let's go.
Okay, so we're now in the level of agentic frameworks. Agentic frameworks are basically not foundation models. They're a series of scripts, bots of things that occur on the applied side. So if you watch the movie The Terminator, Skynet is a LLM. The Terminator is an agent because it has agency in the real world. It can actually do things, which it's browsing or schedule meetings or recode itself and replicate. So what's going to happen in the future with China? Well, they pretty much achieved AI parity in open source software this year. We didn't expect that to happen until like 1 to 2 years. So the fact that they are now comparable in the quality of their models, at least they're maybe like a month to 2 months behind. But that means that they're just going to get faster. And before you saw companies like DeepSeek and Monica, you're going to see maybe 10 DeepSeeks coming this year from China because they gave the recipe, they open sourced their model. And so the way AI works is in the past, you'd need like lots of data, lots of GPUs to train a big model of like 1 billion, 10 billion parameters. But it's like the old joke about restaurants. How do you make a small fortune in a restaurant industry? You start with a large fortune. So now that these large models are basically free and open source, you could just use that big model to train a smaller model, which will fit on your laptop and is probably more efficient. So you're going to see maybe 10 more DeepSeek-like companies coming within this year and hundreds of companies like Monica, which makes Manus AI at the agentic framework. Because
Frank,
these small
Frank.
efficient models are.
Frank, could I
Yeah.
interrupt you with a question?
Sure.
I'm not a technology guy, I'm a lawyer. So what is the fundamental difference between this large language model from OpenAI and the reasoning model, or whatever the word you used on the first slide
Sure.
for DeepSeek? And what is it about that model that is smaller, as I understand you saying it to me, for it to still function, to function well?
So reasoning models they're not just like the old models like in ChatGPT. You ask it a question, it gives you a result. You don't like it, you just keep having that conversation. Reasoning models have that conversations with themselves. So you just basically give something and it'll actually verify and check itself. So if you use a reasoning model, not only do you see how it's thinking, but it'll give you an answer and then it'll stop. It says, oh, sorry, I'm wrong, because it verified itself and give you another answer, which is better. So the reasoning models correct themselves and are able to learn from their corrections. Now, to your answer about why are the smaller models better? So when you have like a big model, which is like 670 billion parameters, that knows everything. It knows astronomy, it knows veterinary science, it knows the financial markets. But to have that big brain takes a lot of power and it kind of slows it up and you need a big GPU to calculate it. These smaller models, because they're smaller, it goes directly to what it needs to know. Like if it needs to know about sort of financial capital markets, it just knows that. You don't have to worry about knowing about dogs or solar systems or things like that. So it's efficient in both energy, tokens, and time. So it's very fast and it could fit on probably on your laptop.
As a follow-up here.
Oh,
As
sure.
a follow-up question, I have no training in mathematics. Can you explain in plain words what are the MLA, multi-head latent attention, and what are the MOE, mixture of experts, and whether they are DeepSeek's own innovation that nobody has had before?
Well, so a mixture of experts I could talk about. The attention one I know less about, but the mixture of experts is what the DeepSeek model is based on. So what that did was, like I said, with the big models, it's a big brain. Now, if you ask it a question in the bigger models, it had to go through the whole brain to basically get that answer. The mixture of experts is already partitioned the brain to the little parts. So if you ask it a question about finance, it actually has a part of the brain which is just finance. So it doesn't have to go through the whole model. So it's more efficient. And that's why the mixture of experts is a much more better architecture. But it also means that the mixture of experts can also talk among itself so that it can check and verify the different models. So if you ask it a question like, tell me about this chemical bond in hydrogen, there's probably a part of it that knows chemistry, but there's also a part that knows physics. And there's another part that knows sort of environmental conditions. And those parts of the brain will talk with each other to do that. And it doesn't have to turn on the part that knows about the solar system or the part that knows about sort of like, credit debt. So that's why it's faster and more efficient. So everything now happening in AI is about efficiency and optimization of, what tokens you can use. But there's also been another fundamental change in AI is that we're now moving to something called test time compute. So when you think of models in the past, you'd get all this data, you spend like maybe months of having the AI look at that data and turn it into a neural network. We don't have to do that anymore. Now, test time means each time you ask a question, you're actually training the neural network. And also, we're going into something called reinforced learning. They're not going to use real data. They don't need to buy the data from, say, Twitter or YouTube or Paramount. They could just synthetically create it and use that to test the next model. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Frank, how do we make money on that? Do we join the gold rush or will you find the gene makers?
Well, I don't know about you, but I don't have enough money to invest in Stargate with billions of dollars or trillions of dollars. So I don't have that sort of capital requirement. But we're now moving to the phase of applied engineering. So if you look at the internet, we're not the ones building like the pipes, the infrastructure. That's capital intensive. We're now at the part where AI is now, startups can do the applied side the way we had applications and websites being companies. So if you look at Facebook, Amazon, those aren't real core internet companies. Those are web applications or websites that became very big. So we are now seeing that in the AI world. And there's something called multi-context protocol or model context protocol, which means that we're still in about 1996 in internet terms of where AI is now, because model context protocols, they're building basically the equivalent of what's TCP/IP in the internet. Right now, the world is a bunch of little walled gardens in AI. Like if you use OpenAI stuff, it won't work with the Gemini stuff. But with this, there'll be a transition, so it'll be more standardized. So we're probably going to see a jump, not just in the AI technology, but also the business models that can now be used for AI. So you can invest in the business models because the foundation models, you need a lot of capital.
Well, Frank, another question. We're known initially as a China investment group, so we like good investments. However, the people who made money in the gold rush out in California were the ones that made the pickaxes and the jeans, the Levi's. Are there equivalents for the AI field?
Well, right now I know that the investments, I went to a Blackstone talk and like they're buying data centers, but that's based on the premise that we need a lot of data and a lot of compute. China is sort of like taking that and says, maybe we don't need that much as we thought we did, which has caused the drop, not just in data centers, but those are the equivalent of what we are. So people once said like, the big thing in AI is data. With synthetic data, the AI will just create its own data and train on that. So each time we think there's a picks and tools that we can invest in, the AI industry says, oh, we don't really need it as much as we thought we did. But in terms of what we do need is we need framework. So if you can invest in a company that is adaptable, because I'd say every 1 or 2 weeks, the technology changes so much that anything that we built in the last month is obsolete. So we expect the change to continue. So making a decision at this point, it's still a little bit chaotic, but you could sort of see the core things, which are, I guess, the bottlenecks of scaling, which is energy, GPU chips, but also just people. I mean, until we replace the people, which is probably going to come in about a year for the first thing that AI is going to replace is AI scientists. That's really what they're building on. So they don't need AI scientists to get to the next model. The AI will just come up with its own models. Yes?
Yeah, just like you said, right now, a number of my, people, my partners, they are just trying to build the data centers, and then they ask not only like megawatts, they want gigawatts,
No.
but they want to rent this or lease to like, SoftBank or Oracle, stuff like that. Do you think we really need a lot of more data centers? If we have a better model, we don't need to use that kind of capacity to run it.
Right.
How do you think?
So the data centers, when they're with all these big Stargates and these big projects, that was calculated when large language model needed lots of data to pre-train on. But maybe that equation, we still need the data centers, but maybe we don't need them to be clustered into one massive data center. Maybe decentralized data centers is the thing to invest in. And the reason why is we can have efficiencies of scale in terms of the cost of a data center, as well as like cooling it, which is why you find a lot of data centers in cold climates or even underwater. But it could be that we need decentralized data centers because of the latency. So when I'm starting to use multimodals, like video and voice, I don't care about the cost of the data center or like the efficiencies of tokens. I need it to have like millisecond type timing. So do you remember when algorithmic trading started? They put all their algorithmic trading centers in Jersey City and also on 14th Street because that's where the trunk was. So saving like even a few milliseconds was very important for algorithmic trading. As we go into more real-time AI, which with voice and video, those data centers, it's not about cost efficiency, it's about speed, and they'll have to sort of decentralize them. So data centers will always be needed because you need them for inference, which is just making the thing run. We don't need them as much for training, but we'll need them faster. And that's, if your big efficient data center is somewhere in Montana and you're in New York, those milliseconds make a big difference. So I think it'll be much more spread out.
Yeah, let me give you an example. Actually, we are.
Oh.
So my question is, can US companies take advantage of the DeepSeek, efficiencies?
Like the answer is yes. OpenAI is already retraining their models with the things they've learned from DeepSeek. They even made the O3 model more transparent, the way that DeepSeek was. So they're learning as well. But the problem with US companies is that we always had a wealth of GPUs and we had a lot of talent. So we're grossly inefficient in terms of cost compared to China. And like I said, Shanzai, the ability for Chinese companies to not only iterate faster, but to take limited resources and be efficient is actually a competitive advantage, which the US companies, because we've always had these resources, so we're not thinking in terms of optimization and efficiency. So, but yeah, but they're using it, but they can't get their costs as low as China at this point.
Thank you.
All right, Frank,
Mhm.
I'll go. So again, I hear the argument between cost and efficiency that
Mhm.
OpenAI spent $1 billion while, we had DeepSeek get it done in 6 million, maybe 60.
Mhm.
But it also comes at a cost of precision,
Mhm.
right? I mean, what do you think OpenAI did that could make it last longer? Because again, OpenAI is a 128-bit number model, while DeepSeek is an 8-bit model. We have a 4x difference. What is the impact there? What do you see?
Well, right now, OpenAI is trying to basically make Chinese models illegal for any US company to use or distribute, even though they're hosting it locally. So OpenAI is sort of doing the EU path of trying to regulate their competition out. But OpenAI is going to get more efficient. In the future, it's now facing massive competition from Google Gemini, as well as Claude Anthropic, and a lot of much more specialized models. So OpenAI will be forced to become more efficient, but they've always been sort of the wealth of resources. And I think Microsoft has made them a little bit spoiled, but now that the Microsoft OpenAI partnership is sort of degrading, OpenAI will need to find a new source of income or basically compute, which is probably why they're going to go become a for-profit company.
Very, very interesting, Frank. As you can see, technology innovation is where it's at these days. Let's give Frank a big round of applause, please.
Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to answer. I like talking about AI, but I sort of just go on a rant sometimes.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
just take a picture of that QR code. It'll lead you directly to Frank. So yes, I think our virtual speaker is waiting for us from Beijing, and I'm just going to from here. Okay, the slide is moving forward. I see some virtual participants on our screen. Thank you, everyone, for participating with us. And I want to also thank David Dempsey for bringing us David Mahon, who's here on the slide right now. Hi, David. Thank you for joining us this morning, your time. I know it's very early, 5 a.m. So let me just give you a quick introduction before we get started. David Dempsey is here as well. And we're going to let you, give a little presentation quickly, and then Dave and I will ask some questions, and we'll probably get some questions from those in the room. But I'd like to let everyone know who you are. David is the Managing Director and Chief Investment Officer of Mahon Investment Management in China, and he's a native New Zealander. So this is a unique combination. He's been living in China since 1984. So of course he speaks perfect Mandarin Chinese. So he has been investing private equity funds in China, 5 of them, and has invested in as many as 29 companies in many different sectors: agriculture, technology, automotive. And we'll get to hear about that. And also, David is an advisor to multinationals and small, medium-sized businesses on getting into China, and also dealing with the different trends that are happening in private equity today, which is mostly around distressed assets. So David brings a wealth of experience to us. We're so happy that he can join us from Beijing. So let's give him a welcome, 5 a.m. his time, 5 p.m. our time. And I'm going to sit here at the round table with David, and I'm going to ask David to to introduce you as well with a question, David. So David to David. All right. Thank you.
David.
Yes, you like David.
So David, I've had the pleasure of reading your materials, which are really fascinating over the years. Back in fact, to the foundation of China Investment Group in 2003, and what I wanted to get to is that you talk a lot, of course, about the microeconomic situation, what's happening generally in the economy. And one of the words that comes across very often in what you write, which not surprisingly, because it's true of any economy, is the word confidence. And so I wanted to start by asking you if there's anything you wanted to say on the macro picture. One thing that strikes me is the demographic issue is a big one. It's probably even bigger for Japan. But we had the one-child policy, COVID, et cetera, lower birth rate at this point. Is there anything you'd want to say on that topic or other macro topics?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, thank you very much, Rebecca and David, and thank you all for inviting me in virtually. I'd actually rather sit and listen to Frank for the next half hour than talk myself. That was fascinating. Essentially, we are living in an economy in China that is recovering, but recovering very slowly. And confidence is one of the major impediments. And China's economic situation fundamentally is very sound. And one of the indicators that always interests me is that if you look at the household savings as they have accrued in China's banks, it is $20 trillion. That's 20 trillion US dollars, which is about 70+% of America's GDP last year. So you have a population that post a crisis don't lack cash. They lack confidence in where to invest. And one of the key areas that has been disrupted, of course, is the property sector, which was the major recipient of retail investment focus. So it's an economy which is at a transition, one in which the household investors and also many institutional investors are looking to see how much the government really understands the current economic situation, having lost faith in them in the last 6 months of COVID, which for China was a year later than other countries. But this is changing slowly. I've been away for 6 weeks traveling in Australasia, visiting clients and family. And I've returned to a country which I can feel is already more confident. People are spending more money. Young people spend perhaps twice the amount that their parents would be spending in similar circumstances. So this is not an economy on its knees, as you will read in Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Washington Post. Most of this now has become a political story where you take Chinese economic indicators and you enter that data into the culture wars. It's very unfortunate. And in that situation, there's a pretty dark picture painted of China. But to be here doing business, to make payroll each month, to help our clients make investment decisions, we're seeing a much stronger economy than the one that you've been described. On demographics, which is an interesting one, go back 8 years, China had too many people. You know, China's future would be basically beleaguered by the fact that there were just too many people to employ, too many people to feed. The birth rate has dropped, and there is a considerable demographic shift taking place. But this is not the issue that China faces. China's better off with fewer people. The balance is an issue. And once the economic structures of young people buying homes, educating their children, the things that challenge every middle-class family or anyone who is in the system paying tax with aspirations, this will change. And I don't believe, like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, where birth rates have dropped for other reasons, more to do with confidence in society, more reflective of a dislocation from society. This is not happening here. So I don't rank the demographic issues as the major issues. So that I'll stop there because I know you want to ask questions, but that's my attempt at first to cover some of those points.
So I know that many of the private equity funds have been trying to unwind their investments in China. Can you tell us about, without naming names, some examples from your own portfolio or your own funds?
Well, we are now at the tail end of exiting investments for our clients. I was going to ask you where the funds are who are looking to unwind, because here on the ground, you don't get a lot of real information. It's a bit like going to banks. We've done a lot of work with non-performing loans by foreign investors and banks. For some years, we were working for the development banks of the Netherlands, Germany, and France. And on the ground, people don't tell you they've got problems. I know with our earlier private equity funds that we raised ourselves, you don't go around broadcasting the things you're getting wrong. You, of course, talk about your performance. So my problem actually has been now for a few years that where the decisions to unwind investments or extract oneself from China are being made are places like New York, London to a lesser extent these days, but even Singapore and Hong Kong. It's hard to find firms that will tell you, yeah, we've got a problem, can you help? You may find a major investor in a fund, which we also hunt, and we're in the process of doing that in Europe at the moment, to try and find which of the major investors need to get out, often for geopolitical purposes. So at this stage, there are many hundreds of millions, maybe some billions of dollars worth of private equity assets. They're not bad assets. The stress is not the investment itself, but the investor. So the question is, we're not that clear. We know of a few. In the environmental and renewable sector, there are certainly quite a number, because that has been a major focus of private equity investors. Technology, it's a little less, it's not so clear. There, I think, of course, and I think Frank identified at the leading edge of that why there's perhaps more confidence in portfolios like that, but also industrial companies. And when you talk about managing a stressed investor's assets, it could be a private equity fund, or it could be a company. One that we did look at, we didn't get the mandate from a family office in the US, was actually an electric bike business, a very large one, and the family wanted to get out. And so they were looking for someone to come in and basically engineer that exit, or to have the partner in China buy them out, which is a common way of exiting. So it's a little unsure at the moment, but we're working on it. And anyone that has any suggestions from the company in New York tonight, I'd be very, very grateful for their guidance.
Sounds like a perfect opportunity for secondary funds. Are you seeing there's been a huge increase in secondary capital in the US? Are you seeing any of that yet?
The trouble is, I do see it, but I don't see it being applied here in the way that in previous years it has been. Part of the problem is there's great uncertainty as to what are the political, regulatory ramifications of extending one's business to China. So I think some of those funds would be trying to find investors based in other parts of Asia who are then exposed to China. Coming directly into the market, we don't see a lot. We do see an increased activity of the asset management companies, not the big state established ones, the top 6, I think it is, but at a municipal level, provincial level, they're very busy picking up assets. So, but again, if someone is invested in hard currency, and we focus on essentially US dollar or euro denominated assets, it's a difficult thing for a domestic renminbi based fund manager to really do much with. It's just too complex. So we know it's out there. And even before COVID, I remember in Hong Kong and Singapore talking to global secondaries funds, and they were doing things in China. A lot of it, though, was at a very big scale, going to banks, getting tranches of NPLs, and then trying to work them out. A number got stuck because acquiring the assets was one thing, beginning to realize their value was another, but they found themselves, which I thought they should have worked out, but stuck in renminbi denominated value, which with China's foreign exchange controls is an issue. So in some cases, I was surprised they hadn't started with that issue first. I think the hope was they could deploy the money as a local fund manager using that renminbi that they'd earned. But at the moment, the picture is very blurred for political reasons.
Can you talk a little bit about the role of the Chinese government in private equity deals today and in multinational companies and privately owned Chinese companies? Because we've been hearing a lot more about the increased role of the government in business.
Yeah, it's we did our first private equity investments in the 90s when you could only do a minority investment. You could basically do a joint venture and become a minority shareholder. Excuse me. Government in China has always been a critical part of doing business. Not that they are in the company per se, but they facilitate the deal. The difference, say, with Indonesia and China or India and China is that government in India and Indonesia, and I haven't done business in either country, but I have visited and looked at those business models in the government relationship. In those countries, it's more of an extractive process where government takes a position to extract what they can from private transactions as they are occurring. In China, because of the very clear capitalist direction of China, where the government is trying to manage a marketplace. It's not trying to recreate a command economy of the kind that Deng Xiaoping unraveled. It's trying to keep withdrawing those threads so that this can become a stronger private economy. Over 75% of profits, employment, innovation, tax revenue comes from the private sector. So this, contrary to the myths that are often said about China, is not a country where the government intervenes and interferes and sort of carpetbags the process. It's one in which the government tries to play a development role, tries to help focus in certain sectors. This whole AI revolution that we're seeing is not something that just occurred over a few years. It's the trend of a decade of the government realizing that they didn't want a mortgage-based banking system. They couldn't take the risk of having property as the major driver of the economy. It was they that initiated the breakdown of the huge property companies, Evergrande, Country Garden. That was a government initiative because there's a strong antitrust focus. The same with Alibaba and Ants listing. That wasn't because Jack Ma was being critical of the government. I didn't like that. Nor was it because the government didn't like the tech sector. They didn't like tech companies trying to become finance companies through the back door. That's why they went. That's why they tried to stop that listing. And I think in general, you will see that it's sometimes clumsy because government usually is clumsy when it gets too involved in commercial process and the private sector. But the aim is to make a stronger private sector. So I would say that there are still issues. And there are times when regulation, as in any country, can be an impediment to running a business smoothly and making reasonable profits. And there are times when you have to deal with corruption. But in the 40 years that I've lived here, government has become less of an impediment and more of a partner and an agent. That said, there are still areas where the government must step back further. And the big one is a macro issue. The Chinese government in Beijing takes most of the tax from the provinces every year, then reallocates the money. That's one of the reasons why the balance sheets of provincial governments are in such poor shape. That's done because they're trying to run a huge economy spread across a massive land mass, a vast population, and tremendous regional differences, and keep regulation in place, the rule of law in place as best they can. However, they need to let go more and give greater agency to the provinces to spend their own money and not have to do what they used to do in the past, which was to sell land for real estate to raise cash because there wasn't enough in their coffers. That model, that fiscal issue, is one where the government's hand is too heavy. I also see it at times around the capital markets. There you've got a lot of state-owned companies listed or parts of state-owned companies. This is going to change, and the external pressures on China are certainly leading it to look at how do you re-energize this economy in terms of not having investors just look back to property as things improve. But of course, it's to open the capital markets. And then the government has some work to do, make listing much easier, less corrupt, and allow better companies more reflective of the economy. So there's areas where their involvement is negative. The banking system's another. Largely, it's a state-owned banking and finance system. It should be 30% at least privately owned by now. If that were the case, this would be a much more dynamic economy. So this is a government that believes in free markets, but isn't always good at getting the balance of their involvement. But any economy in the world, if you look at the history of capitalism, is it 300 years old, 500 years old? That flux, there's always imbalances. Too much government, not enough private sector, too much private sector, too much risk. So it's the ordinary balancing act that is being practiced in many cultures. It's not a political issue. It's a government learning to become more efficient. And as I've identified, get out of the way in some situations.
So I was reading in the Financial Times about the comeback of Alibaba and its ambitions around AI. And that really struck me that they really have trying to turn the corner on a couple of bad years where their market capitalization dropped dramatically. So I'm just curious, what do you think about the future of Alibaba? And since this is an investor group, would Alibaba be a good bet today?
I don't really know. I think Frank should answer that question. He has expertise I don't.
Frank, do you have
do I
a
have to-
comment on that?
Yeah.
Turn the mic on.
Alibaba released Wen 2.5. It's actually one of the best models in the world right now. So yeah, Alibaba's coming back. And then Jack Ma's back, right?
Yeah,
So,
Jack
yeah. So that's a little bit that's a little surprising even for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a meeting, was it a month ago, where just before the National People's Congress, where Xi Jinping was, there's a footage of him sitting with some of the top entrepreneurs in China, and certainly some of the top tech entrepreneurs. And there was Jack Ma, quite prominently placed. So the message was trying to remind people that actually the private sector does matter, does have the support of the center, and certainly technology is an emphasis. So I would argue any of those companies in that photo are worth considering seriously, not because the government will make it happen for them. They're already very successful businesses in a whole lot of sectors. All of them in some way are applying technology in a very advanced sense. The thing that we're experiencing globally, but led by China, I think is equivalent to the Industrial Revolution that took place in Britain in the 19th century. It's profound and perhaps even more game-changing. So rather than fear the changes that are coming, we should be, I think, celebrating the fact that another massive economic shift is going to take place, giving us all more tools, giving us all more investment options, and hopefully in well-governed countries, making ordinary people's lives a lot more efficient, a lot less expensive. So China's at the leading edge of that without question.
So I have to ask you a question about how people that you know in China, how they regard Trump and the second presidency and policies toward China, which are evolving all the time.
Yeah, involving tweet by tweet.
Yeah.
I detect a resilience, a defiance here. It's a subtle thing. The great disappointment in China is that, and I suppose my working life has spanned this process, the great partners of the late 80s, 90s, beginning of the century were America and China. Because two such different countries managed to have a commercial relationship to the extent they did, the whole world benefited. Globalization had so many positive aspects. If you've lost your job in a Midwestern state, or in my country, New Zealand, in manufacturing, you look at this very darkly. But if you look at it from a, excuse me, global perspective, there are so many people who are no longer and will never fall back into poverty again. There was a creation of a middle class throughout Asia in countries that were semi-impoverished or certainly underdeveloped. So there's this there's a regret that there is such stress in the relationship now. That said, Americans, I'm hosting a dinner tonight for a whole group of investors. It's not as on the scale that you are now in. It's but always between 8 and 12 people. And there are Americans amongst that who've been here for many years, run businesses. There's a professor, American professor from Beidar, who's been here 30 years. Chinese people like Americans. They like the way Americans relate to their employees in companies run here by American interests. They still send their kids to American universities. There are many, many aspects to the Chinese government system and economy that have been learned and applied from America. I think there's 10 provincial governors that have Ivy League or equivalent degrees. So that relationship has been so disrupted. And it's not just President Trump. This goes back way before that. It goes back to, you could argue that Obama's pivot to Asia was a very aggressive military shift to focus on China away from the Middle East. And that accelerated China no longer as partner, but China as competitor, and then in some language, adversary. China is not the adversary of the US. China is not the reason why there have been declines in parts of the US economy. That's an issue internal to the United States. That's an issue related to a term I know Americans don't like, but I think it's historically accurate: the shrinkage of empire, the shrinkage of soft power, and the diminution of general power around the world. Not that America's declining to collapse, not that America's getting weak in an essential way. It still is has the global currency, it has the major technology companies in the world, and an extraordinary military. But that shrinkage is one that, for a whole lot of historical reasons and internal reasons, is blamed on China, which is not true. China is not eating America's lunch, but it's become locked in now. And I'm a person of hope. I would take a very positive view of cultures. I can say this not ingratiatingly, but some of my best relationships have been with American investors. I have an American client based in Seattle at the moment, one of the largest dairy companies in the US. And Americans, they consider the human factor. They keep contracts. They're guided by deep commercial and moral principles in business. And that's the way Chinese perceive American companies. So there's a feeling of there's a middle class people are upset by it. They find it deeply disappointing. Now it's becoming defiant, and that is because of what's coming out of Washington. But no one's taking it that seriously, or should I say, they're not giving it too much agency, because China has been Trump-proofing its economy since the first Trump term. President Biden basically deepened, as you know, the Trump tariffs, the sanctions on tech companies, the general blocking of Chinese business and the competition. So in some ways, whoever won the election last November would have been difficult for China. The thing that China has been concerned about is, of course, the more general disruption from the tariff wars with everybody. And China was astounded that Trump turned on his allies first and beat up on Canada. That was something that no one predicted. And I certainly didn't believe that a Trump presidency would be looking externally to the extent that it has on those issues around, say, things said around Greenland, the nature of handling of the Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the attempts to get some kind of peace there. All that has been quite surprising. However, because of what has taken place in the last 8 years, China's moved a great deal of the finishing of its manufacturing to other parts of the world. We all know there's a huge presence in Mexico, but so there is in Vietnam, Malaysia. Thailand is a recipient of many, many Chinese investments, which have extended Chinese supply chains and made China a larger global manufacturer than before. So China's getting stronger. And those partners to Chinese containment that certainly President Biden worked on very hard, they're beginning to step back and fall away. And the fact that Brussels lifted the tariffs on electric vehicles and said, no, we're open for business. We will buy Chinese electric vehicles and welcome the investment of those companies in Europe, shows that because of the current policies in Washington, the United States is losing its coalition power. Even Japan, although it's just finished exercises in the Philippine Sea, which is wargaming in relation to China, that's occurring. But behind the scenes, or certainly in the commercial realm and diplomatic realm, they're moving a little closer to China, worried about what's going to happen to them in the tariff wars. So the dynamic is very interesting. I don't think there's anti-American sentiment here. As I said, there's disappointment. If anything, there's hope that at some point there'll be a reset and that America and China will be partners again. With all the difficulties and all the problems that go, it's a tough thing. It's a bit like, I had a wife once. Do you marry that person again? It's very difficult to consider such a thing. It would never be the same. I think there are some issues around that, but it would take a short political generation to reset this relationship. I don't see it at the moment, but it is in the minds of some Chinese people. But now China's determined to become as independent as possible.
That's very interesting. And we do hear a lot about the reset here as well. So let's open it up to questions from those gathered around here at our roundtable. John Allen has a question. And go ahead, John.
Thank you. That absolutely fascinating. Of course, Jack Ma is a member of the Communist Party, but that doesn't seem to affect his status very much. But I remember one of our ambassadors to China once said, Americans don't like communists. So if the Communist Party changed its name to the Party of Peace and Prosperity, everything would be okay. But here's my question. In the US, Donald Trump and also Vladimir Putin and others have personal investments. So they're always looking for the best deal, making money. However, members of Congress have to put their outside investments into special trusts while they're members of Congress. Does China have any restrictions on individual equity investments at this time, particularly from people like Xi Jinping?
Absolutely. As a Chinese official, you can have no interests, no commercial interests that relate to anything that you may do as a government official. The restrictions are considerable. You can't even be a shareholder in a private company. The thing that happens, though, is that, of course, families become the shareholders. So I'm sure that once you got to any senior leaders' nieces and nephews, you'd find some interestingly wealthy people. So all over the world, there are ways of families and political power of certainly benefiting financially. But the rules are very strict here. And it's kind of a problem because if I look at corruption, corruption can take many forms. I always think one of the greatest acts of corruption in our lifetimes was the global financial crisis, where a handful of bankers in some capitals did some very stupid things, and we all paid a high price. That was corruption. working outside the normal guardrails. I don't believe cultures are corrupt. I think that once you don't police your economy properly and your investment in commercial world, parts of human nature take over and we get some bad results. In China, they are overly stringent, which means that in many officials in provincial areas will find ways to make money under the table, when if they had perhaps a little more freedom to own assets and invest, then that wouldn't be necessary. But officially, the rules are quite specific. So it's very different than the kind of oligarchical gangsterism that takes place around President Putin. That would not be possible here. Not because they're nicer, not because they're more morally endowed. It's just that it is such a huge country that the political system can't afford major scandals at the very senior levels. And I'm convinced that much of Xi Jinping's anti-corruption campaign, while he would always take political benefit where he could, has actually been based around real acts of corruption. And he's been very tough, which has improved the morale of the country hugely and the functioning of the courts. But China's a developing country. It's a very big country, and there's a lack of transparency. The legal system is not above the political process. It is subservient to it. So that always facilitates a level of corruption. So to answer your question, the rules are very specific. They're broken as they're broken everywhere. It's a balance. There's a lot more to be done. I do think that the very senior families do find ways of rorting, New Zealand word, but sort of gaming the system and making money inappropriately often.
Okay, that's just one very quick comment or question about something that's happening right at this moment. And that is China and Latin America, and particularly in Brazil. Bloomberg is hosting a meeting in Sao Paulo right now. And the whole tenor of that meeting is how should Brazil deal with China? And the bottom line is China and Brazil are becoming very, very strong, positive partners, much to the regret of the United States. What do you think about that?
I think that's true. And I think we're going to see this happen across the world, where the US is pausing, withdrawing, or as I see, and effectively I see the American economy walling itself in tariff by tariff, regulation by embargo by embargo. It really is blocking itself off from crucial relationships. That interaction, that generosity that has characterized American investment and relationships, certainly in recent years, post the Cold War, in the last decade, in the last cluster of decades, that's changed, and China is quietly going into the space that's left. China's Belt and Road Initiative was very controversial. It was about creating future partners. It was about, it wasn't debt trap diplomacy, which a lot of people characterize it as. That's a 1972 quote from a senator in Washington talking about American investment in developing countries. China doesn't want to trap people in debt. It wants high yielding investments, or it wants steadily yielding investments through long-term positions. So they're going to do a lot, and not just Brazil, but throughout Latin America. They're going to try and do a lot more in Europe. I think you'll find not just Brazil, and Brazil is a developing and resource-rich country, is very important to China, which in many ways is resource poor. But we're going to see some major deals done with developed economies such as Germany and France. Quite shockingly, I think, if we thought a year ago where we were in the relationship with the States and the restraints on such things, that will begin to change.
Another question, Steve?
Thank you very much for your remarks. I'd like your thoughts on the direction of investment within China, because it seems that you mentioned that your Seattle client is looking to exit their investment. And what I see is also other American companies not only not investing, but withdrawing their investments and looking elsewhere for their supplies. And the stories here that the Chinese central government is focused too much on state-owned enterprises, that the provinces are essentially, if not bankrupt, under severe financial strain because of the weakness in the property sector, that the shadow banks, not just the major property companies, but Huarong and others are being essentially bailed out or liquidated in some cases. And that even entrepreneurs within China don't want to invest in China, that they're afraid to some extent. It's not simply a weak economic situation, but the government is very arbitrary in terms of suddenly changing the rules on certain industries. And particularly shocking, and sorry if I'm repeating things that you sort of read in American papers and such, or that I see anecdotally, that when you have a high youth unemployment rate combined with what was a one-child policy, you have two parents retiring, and yet there are no jobs for their single children.
Right. There's quite a lot in that. First of all, the Seattle client is not withdrawing from China. They're not really here, but they're a major player in a sector where they need intelligence. They need to understand what's happening. They will come eventually. They have been here, but it's, I mean, the withdrawal of American companies is really because of what's happening in America. No one who's established here is getting out, even in the vehicle sector. I'm very close to some of the excuse me, American and European automotive companies. This is their biggest, these are their biggest markets in the world. They're doubling down. They're adapting as they can. It's also not true that Chinese people are not investing, or companies. We do a lot with horticulture, food, land-based industries. It's a choice we made in terms of our advisory work, particularly, not so much in our private equity work, but where we've been focused is, I mean, some multinationals in the dairy sector and in terms of produce. So on Monday, I'm flying to the southwest of China, Yunnan province. I'll be in Guizhou in the middle of next week, which is the most remote, effectively one of the most remote provinces in China, because of the agricultural systems there, which are heavily invested. One good example, not a client so I can refer, is the best blueberries in China are made by Driscoll's, an American company, Californian-based company. You would all know it well. Family-owned, extremely successful business. They've been here about 10 years, based in the southwest in Yunnan province. They have ventures there with local farmers. They bought American technology, American horticulture, and they shared it locally. They commissioned locals to grow for them. It's the premium fruit in China. The Driscoll's berries, you see the label, you'll pay twice the price you'll pay for local berries for some years. Then a listed company in a chemicals company, agricultural chemicals company in Shenzhen, invested 3 billion yuan in the same sector, keen to take advantage of this middle-class premium for blueberries and raspberries and blackberries. The prices crashed 30% last year because of the involvement of this business. They built orchards quickly. They had a massive amount of capital to apply, and it really disrupted the sector. This will even out, but there's a lot of cash in China, and that cash is looking for opportunities. It flows into technology. It flows into middle-class consumption. The fact that the property sector is in such trouble, it's a patchwork of recovery and recession. It's not one thing. A lot of money now is being better directed towards industry, towards businesses. There is caution, yes, because people are waiting to see the momentum and, as I mentioned earlier, the quality of government policy. The last 8 months, that policy direction is a lot better. People are looking to invest offshore, of course. Everyone wants to hedge their bets. There's a cliche I've heard since the 80s. Chinese people want to get their money out of China because they don't trust the economy. Middle-class people can't wait to get free of this country. That is not so. Middle-class people, if they have enough money, would much rather hold assets in two currencies and two jurisdictions if possible. Who wouldn't? We all would prudently like to diversify as we can. People want their kids to go to good universities. Some of the best universities in the world are in the United States. So of course, they want them, they want their kids to qualify in the States if they can. China has some great universities, but there are a few, and there's huge issues with its education system. So this idea of intense capital flight, of companies trying to escape some unjust or some regime that's going to penalize them for being capitalist is a myth. It's a myth in the minds of journalists hunting a story, of journalists trying to get attention by talking darkly about China. So I think, in effect, the problem is, and there's a very good example, actually, I've just thought of, in Jiangxi province, there's a very good tech company. They make post-harvest technology or production lines for a whole variety of sectors. You can think of any fruit, kiwi fruit, apples, oranges. It's an entirely computerized system. It's a very competitive system. But in China, there's a number of other manufacturers like them. They don't have their scale. We're close to them. We're working with them on some deals. They are going to Australia. They're going into Europe, doing their best to get market share there because they are not facing such stiff competition. And that's one of the things that people often don't realize about China. You'll drive the EV companies to set up in Europe, to set up hopefully eventually in America, because the competition here is so intense. The top few are fine. The others, the other hundreds that have been growing over the last couple of decades, every province has always wanted to have vehicles as one of its pillar industries. And what the government does here, what the system facilitates, is an intense form of competition. It's ruthless. So everyone invests in electric vehicles. That's the future. We just go back, say, 15 years. And there's a tremendous amount of waste. There's a tremendous amount of, I suppose, distraction in terms of the sector. However, quite quickly, the very best emerge and consolidate. This happens in nearly every sector. This is a country that since Deng Xiaoping's reforms in the 1980s kicking in, village competes with village, city with city, company with company. I mean, we're in a tax jurisdiction in Beijing. I can see the back of the Forbidden City from, it's a bit early in the morning, a bit dark, but from my window. And my district is quite jealous of the fact that we're moving our office at the moment, and they don't want us to move out of this district. But if I went to another district, they would offer me tremendous tax advantages. They'd try and do their best to get our tenancy. So this occurs at such intensity in China that some companies are driven to try and then look for easier jurisdictions, so they will invest internationally. It's not because they don't trust the country. In many ways, in some of the stronger sectors and some of the larger companies, the returns here are much better than they would be in other parts of the world. And as to the youth unemployment, it is a middle class phenomenon. The number of kids that get to university, every year over 10 million go looking for jobs, and it's been a problem for decades. It's become a greater problem at a time when, like in the US, technology is replacing jobs. A lot of employment options that were there even 5 years ago are no longer there. But also, it's a phenomenon of middle-class wealth, that the kids can afford to stay in the city where they studied and where their parents are based, where there are not jobs, rather than move to where there were jobs, where there are jobs, something their parents would have done. I mean, migration in the US, I'm always amazed how someone is born somewhere, studies somewhere else, and then shifts around as employment options come quite readily. That used to happen here. It's less so now because the difference between a developed or a first tier city like Beijing, with all its schools and services and healthcare, and it's a great place to live. You don't want to go somewhere to a third tier city, even though there'd be a very good job, cost of living is lower. You will in the end net earn more because of the situation you're in with your family in the developed city. So it's an issue, but it's in a particular cohort. It's not all youth, it's qualified youth. And many, again, a Western dilemma, have got the wrong degrees. There are too many lawyers and too many people studying finance. And I probably offended everyone in the room here, but that's been the focus of so many families. And kids have studied the wrong things. So that's part of it. I don't want to make light of it, but it's not the thing that will trip China up. It's something that they will sort out. And because the government does get involved in certain things, they will be giving tax breaks and incentives to companies that take on interns and employ young people in many cities. Every city has its own strategy.
Since you talked about the competitiveness of the electric vehicle market, what do you think about the future for Tesla? We've been hearing about the drop in their sales in China.
Yeah, Tesla. Well, you know, we owe Tesla a lot, and every Chinese EV company owes Tesla a lot in terms of the initial innovation, the way Elon Musk grew the business, the way he brought it to China. But at the moment, the competition for Tesla locally, in terms of the quality of vehicles and their price, is one of the reasons why sales are falling. Another is, without any great drama, the kind of commercial nationalism. I remember sitting in New York in a dinner in, I think it was Merrill Lynch, during the Gulf War, and the French had been very critical. And we'd stopped talking about French fries and it was freedom fries. And there was a kind of nationalism in America, or commercial nationalism. I think it was more token and perhaps more humorous than anything, but there is that going on. Elon Musk's statements, the fact that he's talked about China, and China gave Elon Musk a huge break in the way they facilitated his business. There's a sense, well, the guy's really not that, he's not a serious human being. He seems quite reckless. There's a kind of strain of racism coming through. We don't like that. So a Chinese consumer will just buy someone else's vehicle because the choices are good. So it's a combination of things. It's the competition of well-priced, better cars, and it's also a growing resistance against what Elon Musk stands for.
Okay, great. Question from here. Yes, all the way in the back. Can you speak up, please? Use the mic.
Button.
Oh.
I can't hear that, sorry.
Can you comment on Taiwan being attacked in 2027?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, sure. That's a simple question. It won't happen. It won't happen.
Okay,
It
let's
hasn't
go
been
to
happening
another
for 30
question
years.
now. Okay, thank you. He said it won't happen. Yes,
No.
here.
Germany and Japan reached became as old as China now much earlier. But Germany and Japan is not, the economy did not slow because countries' total factor productivity continue to grow. And China's total factor productivity has been flattened in the last 10 years. And that, do you think that will be the major drag given China's older demographic?
Thank you. The audio wasn't that clear, but from what I understand, you're asking about the productivity histories of Japan and Germany, where the economy slowed but their productivity was still strong, whereas China's productivity has been flatter in the last 10 years. And the future prospects for growth, is that the question?
That's correct. That is, China's has been flattening, whereas Germany and Japan were at the same stage. They will continue to grow.
Right. The great difference is that, and let's take Japan as a focus. Japan's flat decades were partly to do with the fact that a deal was done, the Plaza Accord, with the United States, which basically demanded that Japan kept its currency at a high value, because America wanted to maintain its competitiveness. And that was one of the main agents for the flattening of the Japanese economy. Not the only one, but one factor. But at that time, Japan was already rich, largely middle class. The room for growth and maneuver that a developing country has just wasn't there. The same for Germany. Whereas if you look at the current situation in China, we have a middle class of 500 million people. It's getting younger and richer every day. And then we have 900 million who earn less than $300. No, sorry, 600 million earn less than $300 a month. That is China's energy. It's underdevelopment and poverty, relative poverty, or lack of wealth, is one of the great engines that's driven it these decades and will drive it in future decades. Because those are people who are largely healthy, they're relatively well educated, and they are striving to enter the middle class. That's the dynamic internally that makes China very different than Japan and very different than Germany. Also, you've got the 11 coastal provinces, which you could argue constitute a developed country. And the rest of China, in varying levels of wealth and development, are emerging like developing countries. So China the coastal provinces can benefit from that. You can already see it in terms of recovery of salaries are increasing in the coastal provinces. Those 11 I've mentioned. The real estate situation has settled down more earlier than it has in other parts of the country. So that struggle, that striving to lift oneself out of relative poverty into better circumstances is the dynamo that still drives China. The productivity issue, I think, relates to the nature of banking and finance and investment. There, it is the issue of the state. The state is too involved in banking and finance. It has been far too restrictive of the stock exchange. So if capital markets and the financial sector can be loosened, which the government in the end must do, then capital will flow more efficiently into businesses that warrant it because they're just great options in the private sector, and they won't have to go to the state-owned banks to get their money. And there, I think we will see productivity improve. But, China's productivity underperformance is more of a structural fiscal issue than it is a underlying commercial issue. So I think the very flaws of China are what I look at with some optimism, because in resolving those problems, we're going to unlock more of the market. Now, there are dangers, and I don't want to sound that everything's going to be absolutely fine. We will detect a level of a positive attitude, of course, but there are other things that will happen. How did we end up with an Evergrande? How do we end up with an Alibaba that had already become a major player in the finance sector without the governance, without the assets, without the oversight that a financial firm needs? How did we end up with the property collapse where the government intervened to block these monopolies in the property sector, but too late and quite ham-fistedly? So you ended up with this massive loss of confidence. This is the government behaving clumsily, behaving too late, misreading the kind of trend within the economy. These things are always out there, and there's some problems to come for the Chinese economy. There'll be issues as they begin to loosen the financial sector, where some of the new private players will speculate in a way that creates imbalance, and then you'll have some major issues and even huge investor protests. These things are out there for us, but we'll go through those things because this continues to be a country that wants to become a stronger marketplace. So this is not Japan. This is not a country in a middle income trap. It doesn't fit the paradigms that can be presented by looking at Germany or Japan.
Well, David, this has been really enlightening. Thank you so much. And I think all of us need to start reading your China Watch quarterly newsletter, right? So I wonder what the next
Most
topic is
welcome.
going to be. Well, yeah, most welcome. So yes, you go onto your site and you can subscribe there, right? To China Watch.
What I can do is you can distribute it as you wish. I mean, Rebecca and David, you can just either forward it to your group. You're most welcome just to forward it to the group, but anyone who particularly wants that, and also I'm very happy if someone wants to talk about something or have an opinion on China. This is not pitching for clients. I've always got an hour or half an hour in a week to talk to people. So I can put your emails on my list, or I can answer questions if you want to talk at some stage about China and the economy. I'm very happy to do. It's my passion and it's what I do each day.
Well, we could tell that actually, and we really appreciate you sharing your insights directly from Beijing on the ground. Is so often we hear people in the U.S. who have not been to China since before COVID, and they still talk as though they know everything, but they don't. And so it's just really so refreshing to hear your comments. And thank you so much. And thank you, David Dempsey, for introducing David Mahon to us. And thank you for getting up so early, and all the virtual participants. Thank you for listening in. And of course, everyone here in New York, we're going to be signing off now, and we'll be having a good evening here, and David will be having a good morning in Beijing. Thank you again.
Thank you. My privilege. Thank you all. Bye-bye.